Going on a journey, way back in time, deep into the Western Himalayas. We're going to a place where history isn't just in books, it's literally carved into the mountains themselves. We're about to uncover the ancient, layered story of the region we now call Himalaya Pradesh. So, what stories do these mountains hold? We look at them and see these timeless, majestic landscapes, but they've been a silent witness to thousands of years of human history. Everything from the very first settlers to the rise and fall of entire kingdoms. The answers? Well, they're hidden in the valleys, in the rivers, and in ancient texts. To really understand Himachal, you have to go back, way back. We're going to start at its ancient roots. This journey is going to be chronological, tracing how this incredible, unique culture came to be, starting right from its very foundation. Okay, so this timeline is basically our roadmap. Think of it as a bird's eye view of our whole story. We kick things off in the Stone Age, then we jump into the tribal societies of the Vedic period. That's the era of ancient sacred texts. From there, we'll see how massive empires like the Mauryas and the Guptas left their mark. And then we'll get to the rise of the powerful Rajput warrior clans who really forged the hill states. This is our plan. So let's start at the very beginning. Who were the first people to call these formidable mountains home? Long before any empires or kingdoms, the foundations of what it means to be Himachali were being laid by its earliest tribal societies. Now, we've got archaeological evidence that shows people have lived here since the Stone Age. But the story really starts to get interesting in the Vedic period. This is when India's oldest scriptures, like the Rig Veda, were written, and they actually mentioned the tribes living here, groups like the Dasas and Dasyus. But the most significant of all of them, the one group that would truly shape the region's destiny, were the Khasas. And the Khasasas weren't just passing through. Oh no. They became the dominant force in these hills, a fierce, semi-nomadic people who set up a really strong foothold. Their influence was so huge that they're considered the direct ancestors of many people living in the Western Himalayas today. You could say they are the very bedrock of the population. And this just shows you how deep these cultural roots go. This whole region is woven right into the fabric of huge Indian epics like the Mahabharata. The belief that the Pandava brothers spent years of their exile right here, that isn't just some old story. It's alive today, in countless local legends, sacred sites, and temples you can find all throughout the valleys. Now, you might be thinking these mountain communities were totally isolated, cut off from everything, but that really wasn't the case. While they fiercely protected their own identity, the influence of major Indian empires definitely reached these high altitude valleys, and it brought some pretty big political and cultural changes with it. So, before those big empires showed up, the local scene was kind of like a patchwork of small, independent kingdoms. They were known as Janapadas. Think of them as the city-states of the hills. Two of the most important ones were Trigarta, which is now the Kangra region, and Kuluta in the Kulu Valley. It was these local power centers that had to deal with, trade with, negotiate, and sometimes resist the much larger empires from the plains. And we see two totally different kinds of imperial influence here. First up, you have the Mauryan Empire, under the legendary emperor Ashoka. They brought political control and, really importantly, a new religion. Ashoka was a huge supporter of Buddhism, and that led to stupas and monasteries being built right here in the hills. Then, fast forward a few centuries, and you get the Gupta Empire. Their influence was less about direct control and much more about culture. This was the golden age, right? And the explosion of art and science on the plains radiated into the mountains, fueling this amazing boom in local temple architecture and traditions. Okay, so after the great empires started to decline, a whole new power dynamic takes over. This is the early medieval period, and it's when we see the arrival of the Rajput clans, these fiercely independent warrior families from the plains. They would go on to build kingdoms that would define Himachal for hundreds of years. So how did this happen? Well, with the plains in chaos after the Guptas fell, a lot of Rajput clans saw the Himalayan foothills as a place of safety and opportunity. They moved north, and they either conquered or made alliances with the local chiefs, piecing together territory to form their own independent states. And their legacy is just immense. Powerful kingdoms like Kangra, Chamba, and Mandi became these vibrant hubs of culture and power, and they're the ones who shaped the distinct art and architecture we can still see today. So, What do you get when you mix ancient tribes, epic legends, the influence of huge empires, and these powerful Rajput kingdoms? You get a cultural identity that is incredibly rich, incredibly diverse, and just uniquely Himachali. And you can see how it all comes together in the culture. Religiously, you find this fascinating blend of Hinduism and Buddhism coexisting. In the architecture, this history produced these one of a kind wooden stone temples you just don't find anywhere else. And in the traditions, there's this deep devotion to local deities that goes back even further than all these later influences. The area even became an economic hub, with key trade routes being carved right through its high mountain passes. When you boil it all down, ancient Himachal was never just one single thing. It was this dynamic collection of societies and kingdoms. It absolutely absorbed influences from the great empires of India, but it never ever lost its distinct Himalayan character. It bent, for sure, but it never broke. So I'll just leave you with this question. How does this ancient foundation, this deep, deep history of tribes, empires, and kingdoms, continue to shape the culture, the beliefs, and the identity of the people living in Himachal Pradesh right now? The past, as we've seen, is never really in the past. It's written in the mountains.